What is up guys, Alex here, and today I want to talk about Epic Choir, or how to get a choir to sound like this. So like this kind of choir, like there are many types of choir and many uses you can make of them, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to talk about how to achieve something like this. So in an epic orchestral setting, how to get a choir to cut through the arrangement and be outstanding like this one. So this is actually a cover of a track from Bloodborne, a video game which I've been playing for a while now. And yeah, it has this awesome choir, so I thought that I would make, a Discord tutorial based on it. But the reason why I'm making this tutorial is that a lot of people heard my YouTube music or my covers or my Twitter music and asked me like, Alex, what are you doing with the choir to make it stand out so much and to make it sound so powerful? And yeah, I wanted to address this question in this tutorial, so I'm going to give you a few tips on how to get your choir to sound as big in an epic orchestral setting like this one. By the way, this video is going to be very specific about, choirs like the one you just heard, but if you want a more broad and complete explanation of how the choir works and how to make it sound realistic, you should go check out my breakdown video for my track The Landing, where I explain how I managed to write the choral sections on that track. Also, my orchestration based on a single chord tutorial, because in there I also explain a few things about the choir, and mostly my review for Olympus Elements, which is a choral library which I reviewed. And in that review, I wrote a short thing with the choir, with that library, and I explained how I managed the choir to sound, how I managed to make the choir sound more realistic. So those 3 videos contain some tips and knowledge on choirs, which I'm not going to repeat in this video here. In here, I'm going to go specific on how to get a choir to sound big, broad, and epic like the one you heard just now. And okay, without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. So there are many reasons why the choir sounds so big and massive and stands out so much. The first reason is the most basic and easy to understand, which is like, let's hear again this track, and while it plays, I'm going to isolate the choir and bring it back again. So playing in 3, 2, 1. So you might have noticed that when I isolated the choir, it still sounded good, but it didn't sound as broad or as dense and immersive as it does when it's played along with the orchestra. And that is because the quality and the feel of an instrument is not only given by the instrument itself, but also by what surrounds it, especially in orchestral music. It's really important to prepare, like if you want an element to stand out so much, it's really important to prepare a bed for the element to lay upon, And the brass and strings basically are that bed for the choir. It's pretty much like the icing on the cake. The way the original composer treated the choir in this track is that he created a nice cake first, which is this. And most of the cake, except for the first violins, does not contain melodic information. It's mostly, rhythmic information given from the ostinato of the strings, and harmonic information given by the brass and double basses, which are playing the root note. But there isn't, like, there are the melodies in this thing, And that is another reason why the choir stands out so much, because the way it was written is highly melodic. Especially for the woman's choir, which is this. it is only playing a melody and a counter melody on top of the rest, which is only playing rhythmic and harmonic stuff. So that is the reason why the choir stands out so much. Like it is the melodic aspect of this whole thing. It is the face of the track, and it is also playing at the highest octave which the whole instrumentation reaches into this track. And in terms of you know, orchestration, like, yeah, the usually the things which play the melodies are those that stand out, you know. But also in terms of frequency spectrum, you know, the brass strings and percussion have a much broader signal. Like, you're going to see the signal is more cohesive and more distributed when I play it now. Compared to the signal of the woman's choir, which is thinner but also more concentrated. And this is the reason, another reason it stands out, you know. It feels a concentrated range of frequencies, giving them a sharp edge, and it cuts through the arrangement, because, like, while the rest of the instrument basically feel the rest of the frequencies in a more broad but less concentrated way, the choir really focuses on those few frequencies, and you really hear them, because in the whole spectrum of frequencies of the track, it gives it that sharp edge, and your ear is going to, like, it pays attention to the sharp edges more than it does to the rest. That is why the choir sounds so outstanding. Like, it's the only melodic element, and in terms of frequency spectrum, since it's playing at higher octaves, it has a higher volume, and since it's playing only on certain notes, its frequency response, or its frequency, you know, yeah, its frequencies are really concentrated. What I mean by this is that if I wrote a choir to be, you know, much more chordy, like, not like melodic, but very, you know, with many different voices, and, you know, with a chord sort of nature instead of melodic nature, the spectrum of frequencies of the choir would have been much broader, and which would have meant also that I would have had to decrease the volume of the choir, because it would have been way too loud for the orchestra, for the rest of the orchestra. So I would have had a much broader choir, but also less loud and less sharp, less, you know, laser focused, and it would not have cut through this thing, like through the orchestra. And with this, I do not mean that you need to handle the choir like this every single time. Like, if you hear my other tracks and my covers and stuff, there are some parts of the tracks where I use the choir to create chords and to, you know, define the harmonic side of the track. But in this example here, we're talking about how to make your choir stand out in a melodic way like this. So if you want the choir to stand out in a melodic way, just let it play the melodies and the counter melodies, like I'm going to show you now. And yeah, make sure that, you know, you dedicate its voices completely to that and not to chords, because if you do use chords, you're going to have to lower the volume, because you're going to have many more voices. And again, if you have many voices, they take over the arrangement very easily, so you're going to lower the volume and it's going to sound less impactful, you know. So concentrate the choir in a very slim range, but really give it that sharp edge. And this rule is really true for many things when it comes to orchestral music, you know. Sometimes less is more. Okay, so let's take a deeper look at this choir. So as you see here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 different layers of choir, but like, okay, in the climax there, I'm only using 4. Let's take a look at these 4 layers. So this is what the choir sounds like alone in the climax part. So let's take a look at those 4 layers. And by the way, I need to point out that I haven't humanized this track yet. Like, as you see, like, it's really, how to say, it's really aligned to the grid, and the velocities are not varied so much. So this is something you want to avoid generally. Like, When writing orchestral music, you want the track to be humanized, to sound humanized. So it doesn't need to be so precise, because this is not necessarily does not necessarily sound as realistic as it should if I was to move a bit the MIDI information a bit like this and change the velocities a bit and make it a little bit less precise, But yeah, I wrote this really fast, so I didn't have time to humanize it. But yeah, keep in mind, if you want your choir to sound good, you should humanize it, like I already explained, by the way, in other tutorials. But yeah, that aside, let's take a look at the choir layer by layer. So we have first the main melody, which is this. Which is also the loudest one, but let's hear what would happen if I was to play the whole thing and isolate all the other layers of the choir. It almost sounds as if it was shying away from the rest, It's not doesn't sound as big, and that is because a single voice like this is not good enough. Like the rest of the orchestra is layered in such a way that it sounds much bigger than this single voice would sound alone. Like this single voice does not compare to the broadness and the size of the rest of the orchestra, and that is the reason why I had to add in other layers. But like if I were to add in another layer, but just taking this and maybe playing this at a lower octave, let's see what it would sound like. Still doesn't sound as big to compare, like doesn't sound big enough to stand out and to compare to the rest of the orchestra. So let's see how the original composer solved this problem. So the thing the original composer did is that he took the melody we have here and he added a counter melody below it, but even not too far away from it. So like you're going to hear now while I play them, that sometimes they even sound almost dissonant because they're so close and there are so many diminished intervals, which give that sense of really minor feel, like that dark, feeling that dissonant or that minor intervals give you. So this is what the melody and counter melody sound together. So you hear the upper melody more because, again, the notes which are played at higher tonality, they are the ones that your ear hears the most. But those notes are now given, like they are given more depth thanks to the counter melody below them. And this is a nice thing to do with the choir, to have a melody and a counter melody, even played at the same rhythm. It's even better that way because it almost feels as if the counter melody was just supporting the main melody and giving it another layer of density. But like this counter melody would sound good even if we were to take it alone, like this. And then what the composer did is that he took this counter melody, since it doesn't sound as powerful as the upper melody, the upper melody above it. He took this counter melody and he doubled it at a lower octave in the main choir, like this. Much better. And if we play it with the main melody, now I would argue that they both sound as powerful, and one keeps one can compare to the other. One keeps the same amount of power as the other, and so together they sound more cohesive. And again, your ear might hear the higher melody more, but like it's much bigger, sounds much more dark, much more powerful than it would on its own. Sorry, than it would on its own, compared to how it sounds when played with the counter melody. And again, for the same reason I mentioned before with the frequencies and stuff, it's best if, like, when you're writing things like this, it's best if you avoid writing chords, but you like this. You can call them chords, I guess, because these are, I think they're called dyad, chords made with only two notes. But since they play notes that are really close to each other, in terms of frequencies, they translate into those sharp, shaped frequencies, instead of what it would translate if I was to, play a counter melody which was played in notes which were much more far away. Now, another thing that helped the choir stands out so much and sounds so good is the articulation which I use, which is not sustained choir. Like, for the most part, it's oh yeah, sorry, I forgot the last layer beneath everything. Like, we have this layer of main choir, which it's playing another counter melody too, and this is much more how to say it defines the mood more than the impact of the whole thing, and it plays along with bass trombone and double basses, and it just fills those bass frequencies. But what I wanted to say is that I used the right articulation to make the choir stand out so much, and the articulation I used is mostly marcato, and I'm going to do a video on articulations and what they are, how to use them, and key switches and stuff. But just so you know, like, the marcato are basically short burst of notes, like what you hear here. It's not like staccato. Like, this is what staccato would sound like. It's much shorter. Marcato is like something between sustain and staccato. It's just short notes, short shouts from the choir. And since they are really short notes, the choir can really sing hard because they do not have to sustain that note over and over. Like I explained in my brass tutorial, like these kind of instruments which are played, with, like, by using your breath. Basically, the longer the note is, the harder it is going to be to play a loud note. But the shorter the note is, the louder you can blow. The shorter the note is, the harder you can blow and the harder you can sing. So this, like, section of choir is really singing hard. It's almost screaming, to stand out this way. And like, it has to play in a marcato, like, articulation, because if it didn't, like, if I was to play this whole section in sustained articulation, let's see what would happen. That will suck, and it wouldn't even sound natural at all, because sustains, again, are for long sustained notes, and what we want here is screams, almost. So yeah, make sure, like, if you want to your choir to sound this way, make sure you're using a short articulations, because short articulations are more powerful than sustains. Sustains are useful if you want to write a melodic line which is more sustained and much more maybe calm, but more, how to say, longer. But instead, if you want to do something like this, it's good to use marcatos and stuff. So you have to make sure that your library, or your VST library or contact library that you're using, allows you to change the articulation, and make sure that you're using a short articulation. The library I'm using here is Metropolis Arc, as always, and it has like sustained marcatos long, marcatos short, and staccatos. So another thing that helps, again, is indeed the library. You want to make sure that your library has intuitive features like the possibility to change the phrase of your notes, because some really old libraries sometimes do not have this functionality. They have a whole patch which is based on a single phrase. So instead of having something like that sounds like you have something that sounds like which is like, that is not how the choir is played. A library that only offers you a single phrase in a whole patch is not going to be good enough to sound realistic, because again, for a choir to sound realistic, you need to make sure that you can change the phrasing. And some libraries allow you to change the phrasing by selecting different syllables and creating your phrase, and the choir will follow that phrase. Like Storm Choir does this. And there are other libraries like Metropolis Arc who already contain predetermined phrases, and they are basically automatized, so you do not need to set them, and you can even randomize them, or you can isolate certain syllables. So it's even faster. Like Metropolis Arc, I just open the patch and I go write my choir, and it takes care of the phrasing on its own. So every time I press a note, it's going to change the phrasing, which is good. Another thing is that your library must sound like it must compare to the rest of the libraries you use. The reason why my choir stands out so much is that it's a Metropolis Arc choir, and usually the rest of my orchestrations are also made with Metropolis Arc or other libraries which are new. But Metropolis, since it's new and it's loud, it really compares to them, like it can keep up with them. Instead, if I were to use an older library, say, for example, symphonic choirs from East West, which is a good library, but it's very old and it's much more quiet, much more dynamic, but less loud, it would have been harder to make the choir stand out so much because of the nature of the sound of the library, the way the library was recorded. It's not loud enough. So with such a loud, like if I was to write such an arrangement with a loud orchestral library like Metropolis Arc, and added a choir from a library which was calmer and older and more dynamic but less loud, like it wouldn't, there would be too much contrast between the natural sound of the two libraries. So symphonic choirs alone maybe wouldn't have been good enough. So in that case, like if you have a big orchestral libraries, but when it comes to choral libraries, they sound weak because of the way the was recorded, the first thing you can do is go and grab a better orchestral library, a better choral library, which like Storm Choir 2 is great because the way Storm Choir was recorded is exactly thought to make it sound aggressive, big, huge, and epic. And Metropolis Arc also has a pretty huge and aggressive choir. Like all the choirs you hear in my tracks, it's Metropolis Arc, and it sounds awesome. And then also I think there is Voxus 2, but I never tried that one. And yeah, a good thing is to get a better library. Another thing you can do is just to process it. Like if a library is too old and doesn't sound loud, you can compress it. You can maybe add a slight bit of distortion and stuff like that, which helps into amplifying the sound of the library. But you need to be careful with that, because if you edit an orchestral sound too much, you can make it sound unnatural. And it's not going to have the same impact of a sound which was originally recorded to sound loud as fuck. So definitely consider getting a great library, because again, you need to have those articulations. You need to have you need to be able to use phrasing and stuff. And yeah, they should stand out as much as the rest of the libraries you're using in your orchestration. So yeah, that was it for this basic tutorial on Epic Choir. And again, the things to keep in mind is that first, less is more. You should focus on making your choir concentrated on a few notes so that the melodies come off even more powerfully, like I explained before. Second, you should use the right articulation. Make sure to use sustained articulation when you need to use sustain. Use marcatos when you want your choir to sound more powerful but still not that short. Use staccatos if you want your choir to sound very short instead. Maybe you want staccato sometimes. And it's good to interchange between articulations sometimes. And the third thing to keep in mind is that you should use the right library. Make sure that the library you're using is able, thanks to its natural sound, to stand out or to compete, to not have too much contrast with the other libraries. Make sure it can keep up with the other libraries you're using, and if it does not, use compression and a little bit of distortion to make your choir stand out. By the way, if you want to learn more about this stuff, orchestral cinematic music, go check out the rest of the tutorials on this channel, because I made quite a few tutorials on, brass strings, on how to orchestrate, how to arrange cinematic tracks, which are going to help you. Like, all of these videos really synchronize together. So the information you learned maybe in the strings and brass tutorial might help you with the choir and the rest of the orchestra also. And those are information which I do not repeat in every single tutorial, so go check out those old tutorials as well, because you're going to learn something of value there as well. And if you're new, maybe subscribe to this channel, because I'm going to keep dropping tutorials on you guys about orchestral music, because this is something I'm still studying myself, and I keep discovering awesome things, like how to manage choirs this way. And when I discover stuff, I always make a tutorial about it, so that I can spread information to the rest of you guys, because I think it's great to grow together as composers, We need to help each other, we need to have each other's back. Speaking of which, if you want to learn more from people who are even better than me, you should go check out Evident, because their courses, especially the course on cinematic music, which I'm going to link into the description of this video, is amazing, and it's done from young people like me, so it's not a course which teaches you the old-fashioned way of doing things from an industry worker of years ago. We're talking about courses made by people who make music for movie trailers, movies, and games right now, the contemporary games, based on contemporary industry standards and industry, based on contemporary knowledge and contemporary music. So if you want to learn how to write modern orchestral and cinematic music, go check out those courses. And also, they're great even if you do not have a great understanding of music theory, and even if you're not really prepared to write orchestral music. They're especially for people like you, but they're also great for people who are a bit more advanced. If you want to step up your game, you should go check out those courses and maybe get one, because it's a really worthwhile investment. And when people ask me, Alex, how the hell did you manage to get so good at music in just 3 or 4 years? The answer is that I invested in myself. I invested in my libraries. I invested in my education with courses like this ones. And these are the things which really become shortcuts to your dreams if you want to make music for a living. So if you are the type of guy who really takes this seriously, go invest in yourself by buying those courses. You're not going to regret it. But if you regret it, they also have a refund policy, so you can get your money back. But I'm sure you're going to go back, contact me on Facebook and say, Alex, thank you very much for the Eminent courses, because they are so amazing. Thank you for telling me about those. I'm sure you're going to tell me that if you buy one of those courses. But anyway, yeah, that's it for the tutorial of the day. And yeah, if you have questions about what I just explained, or if I forgot to mention something, just let me know in the comments, and I'll do my best to address your doubts, as always. And yeah, that's it for today. Alex out.